this way so that you can easily understand. Here you can see this line, the black line. You can see this dark black line. This is called as the central sulcus. Behind it you have the post-central sulcus, this one, and in front of it you have the precentral sulcus. Now you can see this line in the middle, this dark black line. This is called as your longitudinal fissure. What is the function of this dark black line longitudinal fissure is that it separates the right cerebral hemisphere from the left cerebral hemisphere. So these two hemispheres of the cerebrum are separated by means of a deep groove called as your longitudinal fissure. Then we will start into your lobes. Wait a second. Let me take a picture of yes. This figure you can see of the lobes. You can basically, and oh, one more thing. Before going into that, we studied about this longitudinal fissure. Now, how the longitudinal fissure functions? The longitudinal fissure is opposite. Like, for example, you have eyes, right? I have two. We all have two eyes. One is the right eye and one is the left eye. So the right eye, when it will send the impulses, it will pass from the spinal cord to our medulla oblongata, from medulla oblongata to our pons, then midbrain, and once it enters into this cerebral hemisphere, here at the longitudinal fissure, the impulses will desiccate, cross over, and will move to the opposite side. So if the impulses are from the right eye, then this longitudinal fissure will send it towards the left hemisphere. And if impulses are from the left eye, this longitudinal fissure will send impulses to the right side. So that is how they are being controlled by the opposite sides of the brain. That was about that. Now coming into our lobe section. Basically, we know that our lobes. Now the brain, it consists of 4 lobes, and they have been given the names according to the type of the skull bone they surround. Brain divided into the 4 lobes. Number 1, you have the frontal lobe, then you have the parietal lobe, then you have the occipital lobe, and then you have the temporal lobe. Now, these lobes are separated from one another by means of sulci or sulcus. Let's study about those sulci and sulcus. The sulcus that is separating the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe, this lobe is called as the central sulcus. You can see here this line that has been drawn between frontal and parietal, known as the central sulcus. Now the sulcus here you can see that is separating the frontal lobe from your temporal lobe. This line you can see is known as the lateral sulcus. And the sulcus that is separating the parietal lobe from the occipital lobe, this line, this one, this is called as the parieto-occipital sulcus. And this sulcus which is separating the 2 occipital lobes from one another is called the calcarine sulcus. That was about the sulcus which are separating different parts of the brain. And here you can see this one. This is called as the Cornice Callosum. This one that has been present from the frontal, parietal, and temporal lobe. This one is called as the Cornice Callosum. And you want to go into deep of the brain. Here we have said that the lobe that is separating the frontal pole from the temporal pole, you have the lateral sulcus. So when you on surgery, when you have to go into deep of the brain, you remove the lateral sulcus, and just medial to the lateral sulcus you see this island known as the insula, which is present medial to the lateral sulcus and more towards the brain. And what is the function of this insula? It helps in our hemostasis, in our maintenance of regulation, not more, not less, in balancing. That is the function of insula. We'll be studying about the white matter, right? All we studied, these all were the gray matter. Now the white matter is also important. White matter basically consists of bundles of myelinated axons, and now it consists of certain fibers which help to connect and transmit information from one part to another. Number one fiber is known as your commissure fiber. The commissure fibers, they are the fibers not shown here. You have these fibers coming, which will transmit the information from one part of the cerebral hemisphere to the other part of the cerebral hemisphere. Those fibers that transmit information from one part of the cerebral hemisphere to the other part of the cerebral hemisphere, those fibers are called as your commissure fibers. Then you have the second fibers, which are called as the association fibers. They are short. You can see here these these little shaded area. Those basically are connecting the one gyrus from the other. So it connects the precentral gyrus to the postcentral gyrus. That is the function of the association fibers. Then you have the third type of fibers, which are the longitudinal fascicula. They will connect this frontal lobe of the brain to other lobes or other parts of the brain. And then you have the last fibers, which are called as your projecting fibers. The projecting fibers, they will go down from the cerebral cortex, from the cerebrum, all the way to the spinal cord to perform the action. Now, as we studied here right now, which diagram here? We know that the ones that are connecting the information from one part of the cerebral hemisphere to the other, those are called as the commissure fibers. Now, the commissure fibers, they consist of this band of white matter that is called as the corpus callosum. This one you can see here. And what is the function of it? This connects the lower part of the cerebrum with one another and helps in the transmission of information from one part of the cerebrum to the other part of the cerebrum. And this internal capsule is basically group of all the ascending and descending fibers which are projecting from the cerebrum down to the spinal cord. So if they are impulses, they are moving up or they are down towards or away from the cerebrum. It is done by the internal capsule. And that group is called as the internal capsule, which is shown here. This is the internal capsule, which is present, which is containing group of ascending or descending